interested in is your money, or the pastor just talks about money, money, money so he can get rich. Well, if you've seen my car, you know that's not true. All right, we can start there. But I do want to talk to you about what we need the money for. And in saying that we need the money, we are completely aware and trusting in the fact that it is not us, but God who provides us with the money. But we use this money not to just survive, but to flourish and to thrive. I think that it's a really understandable and a respectful question to ask, well, what happens to all this money? What does Canyon View Church do with it? Well, a lot of it goes to paying our bills, for paying for the staff that runs the ministries, heating, video, lights. But it goes to much more than just running this building or running the institution, as people like to refer to church. It goes towards changing lives in Grand Junction, in the Grand Valley, and in the world. And I'd like to just take a little bit of a moment to share and celebrate some of the ways that your resources have been used by God to impact the world. Let's start here in the church, start small. With 125 kids each week that walk through the doors of our nursery, or the 300 to 400 kids in children's ministry each week, or around 170 kids that go through our middle school and high school youth programs. Every one of these children from nursery to high school are learning about Jesus. Your tithing creates a secure place where kids feel safe. A place that is exciting and engaging, and engaging at their level. It's their church, and you fund that. In marriage ministry, around 1,000 couples in 2011 went to retreats, participated in our date nights, took premarital classes, or got mentoring. Outside of the walls of this church, your giving feeds 2,000 kids with backpacks of food each week, sends people to visit the sick in hospitals, helps mothers at the pregnancy shelter, and starts a new teen homeless shelter in town. Your giving feeds the homeless, supplied Mesa State students with over 1,600 Bibles last year, and feeds thousands at Thanksgiving. Your giving puts us into 8 schools in the Valley. It has enabled us to give away over 65,000 chicken sandwiches, and it has helped us to grow a garden that has given away literally tons of food. Your giving started 4 new churches on the Western Slope, supports 40 missionaries around the world, builds homes in Mexico, builds churches and schools in Thailand and India, and allowed for 80 children to be adopted here at Canyon View Church. And that is just some of the things that your tithing, combined with the blessing and work of God, has done to change lives. When you funnel resources into a project, you say that this project is important, that it's worthy. Then you wind up seeing the results, how the people come together to worship God, how the poor are fed, and how Christ is being brought into our families, our community, and our world. It all starts with you investing in God's mission.
It is exciting stuff, and it kind of makes your head spin when you see and hear all the things that God's doing here. And as you saw all the stuff of the kids and the youth, the facilities are getting worn down. And so we're having a work day on March 31st. And so if you have a couple hours that you'd like to come and volunteer to help clean up and help to clean out and to spruce up the facility, there were sign-up sheets on the information desk right outside these doors. And we would love to have you join us on Saturday the 31st. All right? So as a pastor of this church, one of the blessings of being a senior pastor, no, I haven't been drinking, except for water, is you get to fly at 30,000 feet, and you get to see kind of the landscape of all the things that God is doing here. And it really does feel like the perfect storm, where there's just a convergence and all these different fronts of the Spirit of God moving in so many different ways that the stage is really being set up for God to do unprecedented stuff through Canyon View. And I am so excited. I told the people in the first couple of services today that in the 14 and a half years that I've had the privilege of being a senior pastor of a church, I've never been more excited than I am now because of what God is doing and what God is going to be doing through Canyon View. And we, all of us, are invited to participate with that. And so along with some of the things that Nate said, we have the Rooted in Good Soil series that we did really helped us to solidify what it means to truly follow Jesus as a disciple. And we saw more people get involved in the Rooted in Good Soil series through small groups than we ever have in the church. What an amazing time. And then 2 summers ago, I really felt like the Lord was challenging us to really be intentional about discipling men. And so we started this thing called PODS, and it's the power of discipleship, and I forget what the S is for. It's like strengthening, I don't know. But in these PODS, it's the exponential power of one guy discipling 2 or 3 other guys very intentionally for 1 year, and then at the end of that year, those guys are encouraged and challenged. Now you go and find 2 or 3 other guys, and you disciple them. So it's kind of God's pyramid scheme. And we really do see a vision that literally hundreds and thousands of men can be discipled in this manner and really get their faith deepened. And I truly believe that when the men of a church step up and say, I'm going to lead, and I'm going to lead my family, and I'm going to lead and serve in the church gets unleashed to move in a way that's unprecedented. The other thing is we really felt a call to raise up leaders, and so through Vineyard Leadership Institute, which is kind of like a seminary for adults, it's a 2-year program. We have a number of folks that are going through that because they feel like God has called them to either become more skilled and more equipped to be great lay leaders in the church, or many of them are feeling called to possibly go plant a church, to be missionaries, to be associate pastor in a church. And we have a number of people going through this that the door is just going to be open for them to be released because of the things that they've learned. And so the Woven Families ministry that Jane has really helped, my wife has really helped to develop, it's just amazing to see how God continues to open doors. And the one thing that we found that I've talked about is the need for post-adoption services for kids and for families. And Jane, for some reason, people are hearing about our ministry from all around the country. And she's getting calls every week asking for resources and asking for help of mothers in crisis that have kids with attachment disorder issues. And Jane is able to give them the encouragement and support that they need. So it's been really exciting to see how God has honored and blessed our heart in that. And then obviously the compassion ministries that we have of being able to feed and resource the poor in the community is just a great thing that I think is significant in this church. And it really is something that I have a very strong conviction that we as a church need to care for the poor. And I have had a relationship with some folks in Denver that are working with the governor Hickenlooper. And that's harder to say than Yamaguchi when you really think about it. And what he has started is this movement called One Congregation, One Family. And the concept is, what would happen to the homeless community in a particular community if each church in that community would commit to help one family for the year to get in a home, to give them support and encouragement and mentoring in finances, in parenting, in job skills, and so that these people can stay in their home. Now, I'm not talking about the chronically homeless that are choosing to be homeless for various reasons, but we're talking about families that have had a run of bad luck and maybe lost a job for a month and didn't have the savings. This is the working poor that end up homeless, and we can help them to get into a home and help to give them the resources that they stay in the home. And so you'll be hearing more about this. We're right in the embryonic stage in this. We're talking to other churches and other community organizations, and we, I think, are going to be very encouraged to see how the church is able to come alongside these families and individuals and get them into shelter in a home where they can grow and thrive. Last week, Jane and I had the blessing of going to Florida with Convoy of Hope, and it was a golf tournament. And so, suffering for Jesus again. But this is a cool thing that a couple of guys that love what Convoy of Hope is doing, and they really love pastors. They have raised money over and above a One Day to Feed the World. So none of the money we raised from One Day to Feed the World went towards this golf tournament. And so they just invite pastors to come that are either doing a One Day to Feed the World or considering it. And they have a 2-day golf tournament. And we were at TPC Sawgrass in outside of Jacksonville, Florida. And if any of you are golfers, you know what TPC Sawgrass is. It has the 17th hole with the par 3 with the green that's on a lake. So it's the island green. There's no margin of error. And so we got to play that. That was our last hole of the day. And I hit the luckiest shot of my life. And my shot ended up 4.5 feet from the pin. And I won closest to the pin of 70 guys. But I'm not here to brag because it was extremely lucky. But the point I'm making here is being with Convoy of Hope, it was so encouraging to hear their stories. And last year, they were able to feed 9.7 million people a meal. And we are a big part of that. It's interesting, with the pledge that I made to Convoy of Hope at this event, they told me that your church, of all the 70 churches that are represented here, your church is the biggest offering. So you guys are amazing. They're feeding 115,000 kids a day through their feeding program in Haiti, El Salvador, Kenya, and the Philippines. And Hal Donaldson, who's an amazing guy that is so humble, he has a vision for feeding over 1 million kids a day. They are responding to natural disasters. You've seen the last couple weeks, the tornadoes in Kentucky and Indiana and so forth in the Midwest. Convoy of Hope was some of the first organizations to send in semis loaded with supplies, and I love what they do, is they bring it to the church. And the people in the church resource their community through what Convoy of Hope gives them. So they're not only able to give these resources to the people, but they're able to share the love of Jesus with them.
So that you don't fall into...
They have incredible stories of people coming to Christ through the acts of compassion that they're able to do, and we help support that. So then we have missions that we've talked about, and there's a guy there by the name Michael Walker who is actually the Vineyard representative for Sudan. And so he heard I was there, and he heard what we're looking into doing, and so we had coffee. And when we were talking, we just really could see that the Lord was setting the stage for us to really partner together, and where we can have all of South Sudan covered in sending out pastors to plant churches. And as you've heard, South Sudan has been decimated and ravaged by a civil war and pestilence and poverty. And so if we bring the gospel through sending in church planters to plant churches in these villages, we also have the potential in the future of teaching them how to feed themselves with what our guys are learning in the aquaponics program that we have here. So those are some of the highlights, along with the video that you saw, that there are significant things happening in this church and so much more that's going to happen. That's kind of cool, isn't it? Now, so for those of you that are close to my age or maybe a little younger, you remember a group called the Doobie Brothers. Raise your hand if you like the Doobie Brothers. You know, it's not a sin to like the Doobie Brothers. And the Doobie Brothers in 1976, they came out with a song called Taking It to the Streets. And I looked at the lyrics, and it's a great song about bringing compassion to the streets. And I think that what we're called to do is to take the gospel to the streets, to the people, to go outside of these four walls, because a church that becomes kind of inward focused and doesn't really have a heart for the community and doesn't have a heart for the poor and doesn't have compassion for those that are broken, what happens is the church dies. It really does. As we go out and we become God's representatives in the world, what happens is God's favor and his blessing over us continues to move, and we're able to take the grace of God to a world that is deeply in need of hope. And I wonder if you guys want to be a part of that. But it's not easy. And you know, when you read the Gospels, it's really interesting that Jesus said some amazing things, some words of incredible hope and blessing. But Jesus also said some really hard things. Did you know that? And you read the Gospels, and it's interesting. You hear people give these testimonies, and pastors will talk about this, that they're on the airplane and they have these great encounters with people, and they lead them to Christ, and they get healed of cancer, and they deliver babies right there in the airplane. You know, you hear those kind of stories. I'm going, nothing ever happens to me. And so on the way to Florida, I'm sitting next to this guy, and we just start talking. He's a younger guy. And it turned out that he sold protective eyewear to the military. And so we were talking about that, and I said, have you ever, do you like to read? He goes, yeah, I love to read. And I said, you ought to read Joel Rosenberg's books. And he goes, who's Joel Rosenberg? And I said, well, he's this guy that is a journalist and a believer in God, and he writes these books from the research he does of what's happening in the Middle East, and it's kind of full of intrigue and spies and, you know, the CIA and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, you know, I was actually, I brought this book that I've never read before. And in fact, I want to start reading it tonight. And he pulls out next to him the Bible. And I just like fell out of my chair. You got to be kidding me. And I said, well, what are you going to read? He goes, I don't know. I guess you start at the beginning. And I said, oh, here's what you should do. And so I opened up the Bible for him. I said, see the Old Testament and see the New Testament. And in the New Testament, see the first 4 books here, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are all about the life and the ministry of Jesus. And why don't you start beginning of Matthew and just read all the way through John? And because what will happen is when you get to know Jesus and understand him, then the rest of the Bible makes sense. And he goes, wow, that's pretty cool. So I gave him my card, and I said, here's my email. And I said, if you have any questions that come up, email me, and I will respond to you. And so we got off the plane because Jane was sitting behind me because it was so full we didn't have seats together. I go, I finally had a God moment on the airplane. But like I say, some of Jesus' words are really difficult. And I thought of Luke 9:23, what Jesus said. And he said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. And when you hear Jesus talk about that, there is a lot of misconceptions of what Jesus was referring to. And Darrell Johnson said that many people have the misconception from what Jesus said that we're just kind of supposed to deny our self-worth. And we're supposed to deny our feelings. That we're not supposed to have any joy. And we're not supposed to have any happiness. And finally, we're called to deny all ration and reason. And so, we walk around and we say, I'm a Christian. Jesus is coming back. Hallelujah. But the reality is when we understand what Jesus is saying here, even though it's very difficult, there is so much hope in what he's saying here. Because what Darrell Johnson said, that what Jesus is really saying to us is to deny the Lord of ourself. That if we're all honest, there are things in our own life that is more important than God is. That's the Lord of self. And it translates into many different ways for all of us. We all have those areas that we really can't give up to God because we want to hold on to it. It's our God. It's our idol. And he said that we're supposed to say no to our Lord of self, to reject the demands of the God of me, and to refuse the claims we have of the God called me, myself, and I. And when Jesus said to take up your cross daily and follow me, in that day and in that culture, that was, I believe, probably pretty appalling to the people. In that day, because they were under the control of Rome, that people who didn't follow the law of Rome, of Caesar, they would be crucified, they would be hung on a cross along the roads and the pathways, and they would be left there to show the people, don't mess with Caesar. You mess with Caesar, you'll end up here. And so when Jesus said, take up your cross daily and follow me, what he is saying here, what Darrell Johnson says here, is that when we put the cross on our shoulders and we are carrying our own cross to our own crucifixion, a person who is at that place and they're carrying their own cross, what they have done, he says, is they're compelled to abandon all earthly hope and ambitions. It's like, the end is here. It's over. And so we're called, basically, if we would take up our cross and follow Jesus, we're called to say, my life, my ambitions, the God of myself is now to be put in the grave. But here's the thing. Jesus, who came and was arrested and crucified and buried in the grave, 3 days later, he was resurrected to new life. And he was resurrected into eternal life. And that same resurrected Christ has the power to resurrect us. And so when we die to ourselves and we die to the God of self, what happens is when we give it to God and we bury it, then God raises us up. He resurrects new life where our dreams, our ambitions, our desires are given to us by God. And then we begin to truly experience the abundant life that God really wants us to live. You see, when we continue to have things in our life as our God, and we won't allow God into our business in those areas, you'll never experience the abundance that God wants you to have. And so this is a great message of hope. And so the question is, what are we willing to invest our lives into? Are we willing to invest our things into the things of God's heart and his kingdom? Well, we are investing in eternity, or are we going to hold on to things of the world that is going to perish and fade away? Jim Elliot, who was a missionary in Ecuador and was martyred for the cause of the gospel, he said, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. What a profound statement. And so I say all these things to kind of lay the foundation for us as I'm talking about the topic today, and the topic is tithing. I know there's a lot of pastors out there that they won't talk about tithing to their church because they're afraid of offending somebody. But I got to tell you, all the times, every year that I've been a pastor, these past 14 and a half years, once a year I talk on tithing. I never miss it because it's so important for all of us. And it'd be like, I have this treasure that I have for you, but I'm not going to share it with you. But if I have this great treasure, and as a pastor of this church, I say, this is for you, take it. Then you experience the blessing. And after each service, 9 and 11, I had people come up to me and say, listen to this story of what we experienced when we began to tithe. There's so many great stories. And so I want to kind of give us a biblical understanding of what God really intends of what tithing is meant to be. And so just understand that this is God's plan. This is the way God set things up. This isn't my agenda, all right? I'm just a messenger, so don't shoot me. Okay, so in the book of Leviticus, as God lays down the law, he says that the tithe is a tenth. It's to be given to the storehouse, to the synagogue, to the temple, to the church. Leviticus 27:30 says, a tithe, or a tenth, of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to who? To the Lord. It is what to the Lord? It's holy. Now, that means it's supposed to be consecrated to God. The first tenth of what we have, of what we earn, through whatever means we earn it, it's God's. It's holy. And when we understand that, it's easier for us to give it back to him. And then he says, whoever would redeem any of their tithe must add a fifth of the value to it. So if you use some of the tithe that's supposed to be set aside for God, God says, well, add a fifth more and give it to me because it's holy, it's sacred, it's God's. And he said, every tithe of the herd and flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord. And so since they lived in an agrarian society at this time, there was no commerce, no money that is exchanged. The way that they tithed was through their animals and through their grain that they grow. So if I was a shepherd and I'm counting my sheep as they come through, number one, boom, take it out, I give it to God. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. Number 11, take it out, I give it to God. 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 21, I give it to God. That's the principle of what he's saying here. And so it's important that we realize this is God's possession, it's not ours. And the tithe is really for the benefit of all of us. It's for the church. Deuteronomy 12, verse 17 through 19. You must not eat in your own towns the tithe of your grain and new wine and olive oil, or the first fruit of your herds and flocks, or whatever you have vowed to give, or your free will offerings or special gifts. Now, let me make a distinction here. Is that tithe, that first 10%, is to be given to the storehouse, to God. And he's saying that you don't take it and enjoy it yourself. You give it to God. And then he talks about whatever you have vowed to give, or your free will offerings or special gifts, is really intended to be over and above the tithe. Because the tithe, the first 10%, is to be brought to the church. And so many people have the misconception that, okay, I'll give 5% to the church, and then I'll give 1% to these different ministries. And so you add it up and you have 10% that you're giving. But what God is saying here is the first 10% is holy, it's to be set apart, and it's to be given to the local church, because that's where we receive the ministry from. And then everything we give over and above that, then you pledge that to whatever ministry you're given to, whether it be Convoy of Hope, or Young Life, Campus Crusade, or a missionary in another country. That is intended to be over and above the 10%. And so instead, he says you are to eat them in the presence of the Lord your God at the place the Lord your God will choose. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites from your towns. Levites are the priests. And you are to rejoice before the Lord your God in everything you put your hand to. He says, be careful not to neglect the Levites as long as you live in your land. So what he's saying here is when we tithe and we give to the church, we all benefit. And we all receive the blessing of that. And the services from the church is able to be delivered to the people. And so you really think about what's happened in our country is